Hi everyone, this is Jacob versus Daniel L.I. Played on the 27th of October. This is very interesting in position. Very interesting game, very high quality. You'll see how it goes. So we got a Rail Lopez going, Knight F6. I don't actually know this opening. Apparently castles, D3, Knight C3 are all moves. D6, is that right? D6 is considered interesting. Knight takes E4 is considered the main line. I'm not going to dwell on it because this is a long game. But to be honest, there's not much I can say that was bad about how the white players played this. I thought it was a very well played game. And what's very interesting is this position that we got into right here is pretty much identical, almost identical to the position that of the previous game that I analyzed. What was that? That was Chaz versus someone. Chaz versus Matthew. Yeah, they got into this almost exact same position, but I don't know if anyone saw that video, but if you remember, this bishop had a choice to retreat. It chose to retreat to B3, whereas Jacobs retreated it to C2. And in that particular game, when I was analyzing it, I came to the conclusion that coming to C2 was better. So they reached the almost exact same position, but the bishops retreated to the slightly different square. Okay, so here castles, and in this situation, I'm pretty happy with White here. He understood the annoyance of a bishop hopping onto G4, and he actually threw the move H3 in here, just to stop Bishop G4. It probably wasn't necessary. You can probably just let Bishop G4 happen and play something like Knight C3 and be perfectly fine. But yeah, H3 definitely it's a way to work out your opponent's most annoying moves or most annoying plans and just put a stop to them before they even start. It's a sort of way former world champion Karpov used to play, and Karpov's one of my favorite players of all time, where he would work out what your plan is and he would prevent your plan before you even get a chance to play your plan. And he basically just gave you nothing. And I think this is exactly the sort of right mindset you should have in a position like this. As you can see, White's got the center, has got both center pawns. He's got quite a nice advantage here, half a point of advantage according to the engine. Just needs to complete his development, then White will get to choose if and when the position gets blasted open and how it's going to happen, or whether it gets blasted open at all. He might just decide to come down the C file. So playing a bit more on the lines of what's my opponent's plan, how can I stop that plan, is exactly the perfect mindset in this position. So H3 was good. Now Black has thrown in Knight B4, hitting the bishop, and rightfully so. This bishop just retreats to B, not retreats, but moves out to B3. You don't want to let this knight swap to the bishop. And Black wasn't happy to just sit there and let himself get strangled to death. He actually fought back with C5. Now, right here, even though the engine says it's okay, White chose to take this pawn here, and it's not really a move I like so much, mainly due to the fact that White is completely undeveloped. Black is fully developed. He's got everything out, both bishops, both knights, king, castle, whereas White hasn't developed this knight or this bishop yet. So opening the position up by swapping pawns off doesn't seem positionally like the right way to play. Instead, you could be looking for counter blows, things like E5 here, which once again might result in a swap off, but it gains you time. For example, if this takes the knight's on pre, the knight has to move somewhere. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe he can counterattack himself. But if he goes like back to E8 or something like that, you might have you've just got that extra tempo that you could use to maybe get this queenside out. You probably need to kick that knight first. And once the knight retreats, then you can start to look to get these pieces out, something like knight c3 or something like that. And you've still got this advanced center pawn, and Black's pieces are very passively placed, and you're only just one square away from developing, and then White is just in an amazing position. So that's the idea of the counter blow here, but trying to strike through the center with e5 is to just gain that crucial tempo and get that advanced center pawn while you got a chance. Yeah, the other option is just throw in a3 straight away. See, one of the things I like about this sort of pawn structure is that this pawn doesn't really want to take this pawn here. Oops. So you know, let's say white does a nothing move like king h1 or something, and this pawn eventually, you know, decided to take for whatever reason. Now black is left with a really horrible, weak, isolated pawn on d6. So one of the things about going for this c5 advance is, as white, you know that black's not going to take this pawn because he's not going to want to leave himself with this horrible isolated pawn unless he has some way to immediately remove it by charging it up the board and swapping it off. But as long as that's not possible, you don't ever have to worry about this advance getting played. So taking is kind of what you're really doing by taking here is your trade. Wait, let's get rid of that. What you're doing here is you're trading your amazing d pawn for his terrible d pawn. That's all that trade does. He's never going to take. You've got this amazing d pawn. He's got this terrible d pawn, and all you've done is you've just swapped them off. You reach the exact same position, but both those d pawns are swapped off. And opening this line up doesn't make any sense if your queen side is completely undeveloped still. You know, opening it up once you're fully developed, once these pieces are out, that would be fine because you've got more space because you've got the center pawn. That would be great. But with these pieces in the corner, not a good idea. So I think that was a positional error. Once again, the engine doesn't mind it at all, but I really think a move like a3 here is the way to go. Pretty much, you know, kind of what happened in the game, but it's annoying for black, in that this pawn is going to be a problem for the rest of the game. So let's actually see what happened. I mean, d takes c5, d takes. I think white still can get into a decent position if he just transposes into that line I was talking about before, where the e5 pawn thrusts up by just playing e5 straight away. And that advanced center pawn is a pain to deal with. And you can be okay that way, but he didn't actually do that. He played a3, and this gets really interesting. It looks like both players were calculating pretty accurately here because black decided that c4 was a good idea, and according to the engine, you know, that move was actually an okay move, c4. Knight c6 would have been better. Just putting the knight behind your pawn, you know, you can charge this pawn up next move here whenever you want, and yeah, the position's opened up and white is still completely undeveloped. And now he has to worry about this annoying push of this pawn, followed by the bishop maybe taking its place along this diagonal and things like that happening. Instead, he chose c4, which is interesting. Now, white decided here at this point to trade the bishop for the pawn. Now, the interesting thing is there's quite a few different variations here to analyze. So when I said they're calculating fairly accurately, it's that, you know, there's quite a bit of complications, and neither player dropped a piece in the middle of it all. You know, at this point, white could win a pawn by taking this here. And after here, you might want to throw this pawn up the board to chase the knight away. And then after the knight runs away, then then you can start looking at playing something like queen takes here, and white's won a pawn, but he's got doubled isolated b pawns, and he's still completely undeveloped. And a move like bishop e6 is just very, very frustrating to deal with. The queen's on pre, the bishop can start looking to jump into here. Whoops, and yeah, the queen line has come open here like this. And this queen trying to find a spot where it can go and keep this pawn defended is very, very difficult. In fact, I mean, where does it go? If it goes to something like c3, then you're just running straight into something like, maybe rook c8. And this pawn is still a problem to try and defend. Of course, this thing is becoming a problem to defend as well. So there's quite a lot of complications here, but neither player really dropped a piece. What actually ended up happening was white decided to avoid all those complications and take this pawn here. Black took it back, and then white took this thing here. The bishop came out here, and then he played knight here. I think bishop there is a little bit better. Yeah, because it just kind of gains a tempo, but black has to deal with the fact that the bishop's on pre, and if he takes, then he's developing your knight for you. But knight there's, I mean, it's not bad at all. And so in this situation, we've got isolated pawns everywhere. Black's got an isolated pawn here, and white's got an isolated pawn here. But black has got the two bishops, and the two bishops in a wide open position like this is very, very strong. There's another reason why bishop here, I think, is a better move. Okay, knight c3 was played, bishop c6. So, you know, the automatic straight away, the two bishops have started coming to life. I mean, the threat of taking this knight and then grabbing this pawn is straight away, you know, a problem because of these two bishops. So white played e5, black just traded queens, and when white decided to wreck white's pawn structure, I kind of like the idea of maybe hanging on to your two bishops, not just giving them up straight away. You know, the knight's on pre. Maybe the knight can move somewhere. You know, knight into e4 or something, and just preserve these two bishops for a bit longer because they're going to be very annoying with the number of squares they're going to control. But there was nothing wrong with doing this. I mean, takes, and then knight into knight into e4, hitting this pawn straight away. Black threw rook d4 in, and this kind of leads to a massive swap off. Knight takes c3 was actually fine. Rook takes, because the bishop can get out of danger from the rook fork by taking the knight. And after the pawn took back, the knight's got e2, ripping off the bishop. And we end up with this double rook ending. Equal material, but black has got this passed a pawn charging up the board. But white's rooks are more active, and his king is a little bit more centralized. It's probably drawn, but yeah, if anything, white probably has the better chances on account of the slightly more active rooks and slightly more active king. So h6 probably to just eliminate back row mate threats, so the rooks can venture off the back and go on an adventure. King e2, so this king is getting active very quickly. f4, f6. So black doesn't want any part of that. He's immediately put white under pressure and tried to use the active king as a target by pinning this pawn. Rook e4 was played, and now this pawn starts marching up the board with the rook behind it. So it's a really good play by black to keep white under pressure, and not just let white's king charge into the middle and gain a huge advantage straight away. So rook here was played to stop this pawn going any further up the board. Pawn takes, rook comes out to here, and king d3, and black took the opportunity to swap off another pair of rooks. So we got the rook and pawn ending here. Now, you know, on first glance, it looks like white might be better, but white's king is going to get stranded all the way off on this side of the board, dealing with this pawn, and this king's going to be able to run in. The big problem, though, for black is that the king might run in, but this is going to be, this is going to be a connected pass pawn. Once this pawn gets to here, you got a connected pass pawn, so it should be drawn. White's king is going to be completely out of play, but black's not going to be able to make any progress. So, you know, the game kind of continued like that. Here, black just offered to swap off and said, we want to trade pawns, and that would be just dead drawn. White actually played for the win and tried to win this. Black just hit that pawn. The pawn went up. Rook over to a8. The king went to a3. And now this situation I was talking about is unfolding right now. So king f7. This king starts getting active. Rook takes, king takes, king e6, and this should be dead drawn. All black has to do now is play g5, and the game is just a complete draw. And you know, I mean, white actually has to be careful how he does this. So what happened here was king b3, and now g5 is the move, but the idea is, I mean, you can take that still. I mean, after takes, he has to take back, and then, you know, your king can get in behind this pawn in time. So if you just want to look at the variations here, you got king d2, king f4. So yeah, in this situation you got h4, which you know, if the pawn takes, you've got a rook's pawn, and all this white king has to do is get to f1, and it's just dead drawn. King here, king there, and now it's drawn. Wherever the king goes in to keep this king out, this king goes here, and black ends up stalemating himself like this. However, if the king stays out and tries to march the pawn up, the king gets in front, and he ends up stalemating white. So it's this h4 move which is annoying. So here black has to play g4 in order to avoid that, and this king can just run across into here. And the thing about this is if the king tries to run in front of the pawn and get to h2 to support his pawn, white ends up actually winning, because the king gets the pawn queens with check. So they both get to the same point of the board, and white actually ends up winning if black tries to win this. So you know, you have to find that crucial h4 move still to get the draw, giving your opponent a rook's pawn instead of a g pawn. But something really interesting happened. Let's go back. Take there. Now in this situation, yeah, like I said, g5 is the move. G5 completely draws the game. According to the engine, even g6 and king d5 are also drawn. So even after those moves, black can draw the game. They both look very risky. You're just letting this white king get one step closer to the king side. But the move he actually played was a horrific blunder, king f5, and now it's just a win for white. It's just, I mean, this is just a complete waste of a move. There was no need to play. You had to go g5. Well, you didn't have to, but he should have played g5 straight away. Now, after king f5, white wins. After king c4, you know, what does black do in this situation? You know, so the threat is just to go king here, and then the pawn and the king charge up the board. And you know, I mean, if you go g5 now, then just king d5 and win for white. You know, he can take, but pawn up, and you know the race is on. But the problem is the king and the pawn on the queening square are on the same line. So you know, up. Here we go, queen, queen, and then follow up with check with the skewer, winning the queen at the end. And you know, and if black tries to go with the pawn as the pawn goes up the board, well, that doesn't help at all either, because the king just goes with it. Because every time you move your king up one square, you're wasting a move in the race. So white can afford to waste a move in the race to keep the pawn protected. So after pawn up, you know, king here, we just go king here again. And the issue here is that you queen with check, because the king is now next to the queening square. So you know, in this situation, after king c4, you know, the only other real try and draw this is to play the king back to e6. But then once the white king gets in, his extra pawn should win in the game. g5 now doesn't do anything at all, because the e5 pawn is defended by the king. You can just take it, and after he takes back, you just go king e4, and black is going to lose this pawn. You can't even keep it. It's just going to get taken, because the king's going to force its way into f5 and then take the pawn and then come back and defend this, and then black can't stop the two pawns. So after king f5, king c4, white has just guaranteed win. And there's no other, you know, we can look at some of these other things like g6 and king g6, but they all end pretty much exactly the same way. Win for white. Now the fantastic thing, or not so fantastic thing, is that white missed that. He didn't just grab that opportunity to play king c4 and get the win. He was so worried about this this g5 push. He thought he'd try and prevent it, and he played h4. Now the game is dead drawn, and black gets his g5 advance in, which he's did, and there's no contest here. You know, so obviously if white takes, black just grabs this pawn and then runs back and mops up this pawn here. So white tried one last attempt to get the win here and played h5. However, the king can just safely grab this, and it's within the square of this pawn here. And yeah, white just played king c2. Black played king f6. There's not much he can do here. This game is, you know, pretty much there's no way black can get his king, you know, into position in time in front of the pawn. And this king and pawn ending, everyone hopefully knows very well. It's interesting to note that Jacob was showcasing his understanding of coordinate squares with this ending. The king, so you know, he's correctly just going back and forth here. What Daniel tried to do was trick Jacob by putting his king here, and you know, king here is just dead drawn. But what Jacob's showing here is something called long opposition, where the king's in opposition but an odd number of squares away from each other, and that way he keeps opposition no matter what. And he keeps putting his king on the right square every time. So Daniel tried to trick Jacob into mucking this ending up, but Jacob understood what to do, just king back and forth, back and forth. In this situation, one last thing, Daniel tried this. Jacob can still do this, but just to be cheeky, he's gone coordinate squares and gotten long opposition. And in this situation, they got to here and they just called it a draw, as they both understood that when Daniel realized Jacob understood the ending very well and wasn't going to mess it up, they just agreed to draw. So it's a very, very high quality game. Just the one massive blunder two massive blunders, which happened one move apart. This King B3, King F5, massive blunder, throwing away the game, and then White missing the win. And yeah, unfortunate. The rest of the game was pretty awesome. Was gold. It was very high quality chess. A bit too much swapping off for my liking. I kind of prefer players to keep more tension in the position, but in general, very good game between them. Okay, I hope you all learned something from this and enjoyed that game. And thanks for listening. Bye.